What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the most important role players for every team in the Western Conference. If you missed the Eastern Conference video, you can check that out up here. Also, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials in the description as well. And let's go ahead and get started. So we begin with the Golden State Warriors, and I went with Jordan Poole. I understand that the numbers are not fantastic, especially from three-point range right now for Jordan Poole. You could have made the argument that someone like Damian Lee should have made this part of the list, but for me, I just think Poole has a little bit more upside. He came into the season with more hype, and I think he's a better scorer than Damian Lee, can do a little bit more on his own, and I think for a Golden State team that relies so heavily on Steph and on his creation until other guys return from injury, that role that Poole fills is super, super critical. I think he'll play better throughout the rest of the year, so I went with him for this selection. Next up, the Clippers. Similar vein here. Reggie Jackson was awesome, like out of control good for the Clippers in the postseason last year, and this is a team that's struggling to score the ball right now. There's a lot of Paul George stuff. Obviously, no Kawhi right now. And apart from that, like the rest of this roster is really not that good. So Reggie Jackson has to step up. He has to be a really good scorer for this team in order for them to be successful and be an above-average NBA offense. And it's kind of weird how much they're relying on him at this point, but they certainly are, and that's something to keep an eye on here through the rest of the season. For the Lakers, I went with a guy that has been hurt to begin this year, but it's Talen Horton-Tucker. Part of that reason is just because they don't have another starter out there. I mean, they're starting like Kent Bazemore and Avery Bradley, and like Melo is playing a huge role for this team. And I think that maybe I overrated their depth a little bit, but Horton-Tucker can solve some problems here once he does return from injury as an interesting scorer, a guy that provides a little bit of a dynamic element to this scoring group because, you know, Melo's going to hit a lot of jump shots. Bazemore's going to hit some shots off the ball. But if you need a guy that's going to get to the rim, that's not Russ, that's not LeBron, that's not Anthony Davis, Horton-Tucker can provide some of that. And I think he's going to be an interesting guy to watch in terms of how he, changes some things for LA once he does return from injury. Next up, the Nuggets. I went with Will Barton because without Jamal Murray, the Nuggets are just going to struggle to score the basketball at times. Michael Porter Jr. has not had a very good start to the season. Jokic has been out of control. But apart from that, I mean, this is the role that Will Barton has supposed to have filled for years now. He struggled at times to stay healthy, but when he is healthy, he's a really dynamic scorer that isn't going to be incredibly efficient, but he fits that mold of a bench guy, a fringe starter guy that he's going to take a lot of shots, but he's going to be an above average offensive player. And especially for a Nuggets team that doesn't have nearly as many offensive options as you would hope to have while they're waiting on Jamal Murray to return from injury, Will Barton is a really, really critical player for this group. Next up, Utah. I went with Royce O'Neil just because he can defend. He's kind of been the unsung hero from a starter standpoint for this group for a long, long time. And, you know, he can defend. He can shoot. He just fills in the gaps everywhere. When Royce O'Neil's having a good game, when he's knocking down shots, it is a super, super helpful thing for Utah to have because defensively they rely on him a good amount from, depending on certain matchups. And offensively, everything about what they do, if you're not one of the main guys, is about making shots off the ball. So he is certainly really important for them. Next up, the Blazers, Norman Powell, who was kind of their big addition, I guess, last year when they traded away Gary Trent, brought in Norman Powell. Not fantastic size when you consider that it's Lillard, McCollum, and Norman Powell, and all those guys are 6'4" and under, but still defender, shooter. It's your typical 3-and-D guy, right? But I think Norman Powell has maybe a little bit more juice than that at times as a scorer if you really, really need him to. But on a Portland team that is so star-centric, a guy like Norman Powell has to play well for them to be successful, which makes him a really, really important role player. Next up, Minnesota, Malik Beasley. Not a great start to the preseason or the regular season for him, but he's a very talented player. There's a reason that he has scored 20 points per game for stretches throughout his career. And again, Minnesota is another one of those teams that, like, you look at the roster and you're like, these guys have some really nice players, but they have to actually perform. And Malik Beasley is one of those guys that's just not performing right now. Edwards has been good. Cat is obviously fantastic. D'Lo's been iffy. But Minnesota needs all the offensive firepower they can get because that's how they're going to win games. They're just not going to be very good defensively. They need guys like Malik Beasley to play well, and it's one of the reasons why he is super important for them. Next up for Phoenix, I went with Cameron Payne because, I remember when they went into the bubble and went on that run, Cameron Payne, I felt like had just showed up. I forgot that he existed in the NBA, and he's like shockingly important to this group, whether it be in that playoff run last year, obviously Chris Paul being hurt, but he just provides them some juice, get to the rim. Really, really fast player. when he's making jump shots, like he's a really, really good guard. He's not like, not a starting caliber guard or anything, but he's a really important guy that's feisty defensively. He makes a ton of plays for you, provides a ton of energy. When he's making jump shots, he can help you space the floor. And when Chris Paul comes off the floor, they can rely on Cameron Payne a little bit here to create offense, get to the rim, get other guys open. And again, especially during the regular season, a long regular season, that kind of creation becomes really, really important. Next up for the Kings, I went with Tyrese Halliburton, who has not had a very good start to his second season, but I really don't think there's that many people around the league that don't like Tyrese Halliburton and don't appreciate what he does from a winning standpoint. He's just struggled offensively, but defensively, he's always almost in the right spots, makes great plays in the passing lanes, can get out in transition, good on-ball defender as well, and just offensively, it just hasn't quite been there for him. He's looked a little bit out of rhythm, but that's going to happen. Sacramento's guard rotation, though, has suddenly gotten very, very interesting and up in the air. Davion Mitchell's been really good as a rookie. De'Aaron Fox has been a bit up and down this year. Buddy Hield's been in trade rumors for 2 years, and they really need Tyrese Halliburton to be somebody, whether it be in a trade or for their actual team. And so hopefully that continues because, as this list implies, he's very, very important to that group. Next up for Houston, you could go 8 different ways. I went with Kevin Porter Jr. here just from an upside and a scoring potential standpoint. Kevin Porter Jr. is obviously a talented player. He needs to continue to grow as a playmaker, cut down on the turnovers, but strictly from a we need a guy to go get us 10 points in this quarter type guy, Kevin Porter Jr. can absolutely do that. And for a Houston team that, even though they've got exciting players and a ton of rookies and some nice veterans as well, they're still going to struggle to score the basketball at times until Kevin Porter Jr. becomes a really critical part of that group. Next up, for the Grizzlies, I went with Steven Adams, who I think has been good for them. The JV trade was interesting at the time, but I just think that Adams, you could argue he doesn't fit as well because JV could have spaced the floor for you, but Adams is a better defender. I feel like he fits really well with that grit and grind mentality that this Memphis team has kind of embodied now, and even in the post Mike Conley, Marc Gasol era. And even though they've got some interesting bigs on that team, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark, they still really rely a ton on Steven Adams, and that makes him a really critical part of this team. Next up, San Antonio. I went with Keldon Johnson. I don't know what to do with this team, man. They are all over the place. There's really not a ton of talent here, but if there's someone that I feel like on a night-to-night basis is going to do the correct things, is going to make winning basketball plays, is going to be someone that I feel good about by the end of the night, it's Keldon Johnson. He's not a star by any means. He might not even be an average NBA starter at this point, but he's a good player. He's a guy that I know is going to go out there and do the correct things, and that's just where I landed on with this Spurs entry because it was really difficult to come up with. For the Mavs, I went with Reggie Bullock. We talked about in the offseason how his addition could potentially open up some lineup changes for this group, giving them an extra wing that they have struggled for years to have any kind of decent wing players, of course, other than Luka, but I consider him a guard at this point. It's been Dorian Finney-Smith and Maxi Kleber and nobody else. And so having Reggie Bullock as a shooter, as a decent defender, really helps them in that area. For the Pelicans, I went with Devontae Graham. The Pelicans are kind of a disaster at this point, but at least he can be a good shot creator, or a good shot maker, in the backcourt. Not going to be a great playmaker, not going to be a great defender, but if you need a guy to knock down some shots, provide you some offense in the backcourt, Devontae Graham can certainly do that. And then last up for the Thunder, this is the prototypical role player guy. If every team in the league had a guy like this, they'd be super happy, and it's Lu Dort. He's improved offensively. The shooting stuff can still be very, very inconsistent, and he needs to be more consistent with that if he's going to have a long NBA career. But Lu Dort provides energy. He's a really good defender. He provides really good size, and as long as he can shoot the basketball, he is literally everything you would want out of a two-guard role player in the NBA. In the modern game, Lu Dort is everything that everyone is looking at across the league. I'm going to be honest, this side of the league was way more difficult to come up with role players than the Eastern Conference was. The Eastern Conference, I looked and I thought about it and I immediately thought, okay, this is the guy. In the West, I don't know if it's because they're more top heavy. I don't know if it's because they're deeper and there's just more options. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but this was definitely a more difficult side of the conference, or side of the league, to identify the most important role players for every team. But that is going to be my list. Let me know down in the comment section below if you think there is a player on this list that shouldn't have been, or a player that isn't on the list that should have been. And again, check out the Eastern Conference side of this as well. With all those things said, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen, leave a like rating on this video if you enjoyed it, and check out my socials down in the description below as well. With all those things said, like I said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.